There are opportunities to worship God everywhere, but they might be easily missed. Most often, we see images of worship being done behind microphones and on stages. While that kind of worship is good, it isn't the only kind of worship we need. The book of Psalms helps us find our own unique anthems. The Psalms leads us to worship God with all of creation, remembering what God has done, even when it's difficult, because we are God's family. As we explore this beautiful collection of ancient Hebrew poetry, we will discover that worship is much bigger than we ever imagined.
Have you ever forgotten an important detail? Maybe you prepared for a test and when you got the test in front of you, you just completely blanked. Or your parents asked you to do 2 or 3 things and you can't remember any of them. Or you were given a really important detail, a piece of information at work or at school or to perform a task, and you just completely forgot it. One of the things that's amazing about music is it has the ability to help us remember. That's why when we teach kids things like the alphabet, a lot of times we'll teach it in song form because there's something about music that triggers our memory. Last week we started a new series where we're exploring a book of the Bible called the Book of Psalms. And this book is a collection of songs and rhymes and rhythms and poetry written by and for the nation of Israel. And just like we use songs to remind us of important things like the alphabet, the writers of the Psalms did this too. They wrote down some of the things that God had done for them so that when times were tough, when things were difficult, when their minds were cloudy, it would be easy for them to remember and to trust God, even in the midst of all those bleak things that were going on in their life. If you were to look in the book of Psalms, in Psalm 120 through 134, these are 15 very short songs in the book of Psalms. And it's believed that the Israelites used to sing these songs, Psalm 120 through 134, on their way to worship God in the temple or at one of the commemorative festivals that they shared as a community. And when you read through these Psalms, you'll find some recurring ideas and some themes, things like trusting God and everything's going wrong around them and enemies are attacking, but God rescues them or God shows up and helps them. God heard their prayers and God did something amazing. And the pattern of these Psalms is really simple. It's a helpful formula to help us remember how to give God praise in the midst of difficulty. These Psalms start by saying, I'm in trouble or we are in trouble. And the Psalms continue to say, we call to God and God heard us. And then they say things like, we trust God, God helps us. And then they usually end with something like, God deserves our praise. There's another set of psalms that were used in worship and worship gatherings by the Israelite people. These are Psalms 113 through 117. These were traditionally sung during the Passover festival of the Israelite people, where they remembered what God had done for them when they were liberated from slavery in Egypt. See, we may not be good at remembering details, but we can learn to remember the stories of God's goodness and praise God because of them. Those songs that we find in the book of Psalms are worth remembering, and new songs that we use to worship God are still being written. It's worth writing them down because when we worship, we're reminding ourselves of what God has done. So what do we do now? Well, scientists who study the human brain have observed something called neuroplasticity. They've learned that through brain scans that people who spend time every day on a regular basis remembering what God has done through prayer and worship actually increase the neuroplasticity of their brains. So when we regularly and consistently spend time focused in prayer and worship, the stronger the neural connections will become in our brains. The easier it'll become for us to make prayer and worship habits in our lives. The easier it'll be for you to remember exactly what God has done, and the more real and personal your faith will become. In other words, even when you're not feeling full of faith, you can worship anyway because you remember what God has done, and responding in worship can actually help you build your faith in those moments of crisis and those moments of trial. God has done amazing things for us, both individually and as a community, and for all of humanity. And we can remember those amazing things through worship.